Hello, I hope you're healthy and doing well. My name is Hernan. I'm a solutions architect for AWS. I've been with the team for 3 years, and I've been working with AWS services for 9 years now. 5 of them, all things serverless. And I want to help you. It is my pleasure today to help you answer one question. But first, let's get one thing out of the way. Serverless has servers. No, you already knew that. The path to modernization, to transformation, could look different for every organization. And there's one thing that we have found out that is certain for everyone. You and your team, right now or very soon, are going to be faced with a choice. Two options. To build that amazing new feature or system in a serverful or serverless way. And you think about how this system or this feature is critical for your organization and how the path to build it must have also a lot of certainty. A road that is more traveled. And serverful seems more travel and safer for you and your organization. Serverless, on the other hand, seems less travel. However, the reality as of today is that both roads are equally traveled, they're equally warm, and they both go to the same place. So this is the first thing I'm going to say to you. All roads lead to serverless. And that's why, because you want to provide that next unit of value for your customers in the fastest way possible. With that in mind, you and your team now want to understand which serverless services you can use, how to design the interaction between those services, and of course, you want to understand the best practices around operating this new serverless workload. And that's what we're going to talk about today. In my experience, when building with serverless, it is key to understand you will be entering a new state of mind. And you have to embrace it because it will allow you to make the right decisions and choices during this journey. Patching an OS, rolling out software to hundreds of servers, managing their scale, or paying for idle, those are things that take your focus away of what really matters, giving your customers the best experience they can have. This is the path that companies like Dyson, iRobot, or Fender has taken. They use serverless as a preference. This is what we call the serverless first approach. This organization realized that the role that the application plays has dramatically changed and has become the business itself. A serverless first approach enables you to achieve the most benefit from the cloud, which is faster times to market and maximal agility. These 4 key factors you see in this slide allow serverless to do that. The first thing is removing heavy lifting, that is service operations, sizing, provisioning, and management. Second, providing infrastructure that meets your demand. I'm talking about real elasticity, adding resources when they're needed and removing them automatically when they're not. And characteristics like fault tolerance, high availability, and security are also at the core of these services. As a consequence, you only pay for the value you provide. This may seem as a new word, but it is not. It is not exotic. It is not bleeding edge. As of 2020, it is nuts and bolts. And that's why you need to go back to the foundation, to the best practices around architecting for the cloud. If you're designing the next big feature, or you are near to launch, or you have been into production for some time now, you need to be able to answer this question. And let me tell you, the answer is not, I hope so, or I think so. There's a way to answer these questions in the most objective way possible. In fact, there's a mechanism, a complete process to evaluate your system. You may already know the Well-Architected Framework and its twin, the Well-Architected tool. With them, you can build secure, high-performing, and resilient systems. You answer not one, but a group of foundational questions around how do you run and monitor or improve your systems? How do you protect the system and the data that is flowing through that system? How do you ensure it's reliable, that it can actually quickly recover from failures? Also, how do you choose the right resources to maintain performance? And last but not least, how do you avoid unnecessary costs? How do you understand and monitor where money is being spent? Good news is that we walk this path with you, really close. You can call me or anyone in the solutions architecture team or a partner with the well-architected competency, and we will start a review with you. That is right in the web console with the well-architected tool at no cost. And we together will find opportunities to improve, and we'll write down those findings in a report. After a few months, we will create a remediation plan, and we will work with you to remediate those findings. After a few sessions, you'll finish with the first iteration of your masterpiece. A few months later, we will repeat the process, and again, and again, and again. And that's because there will always be opportunities to improve your infrastructure. Now, listen to me. As with everything in life, you're going to find an old guard that will create fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But please don't mind the negativity. Truth is that the earlier you adopt the well-architected framework, the better. We're going to have these sessions. We're going to have a lovely, constructive conversation, all in favor of your benefit. You're going to learn AWS best practices with two goals in mind. You're going to learn those best practices around architecting for the cloud to mitigate the risk while you provide value. And you're going to provide that value in the fastest way possible. At some point, after fully adopting the well-architected framework, it's only natural for you to embrace the serverless mindset. You're going to feel happier, I tell you, and you're going to be willing to get to the next level. With that peace of mind, you're going to realize that to be able to provide value faster, you're going to need a new set of high-level services, which we call serverless. And you're going to have questions. When can you use serverless? Does serverless fit your use case? And you're going to see that serverless is at every layer of your architecture. I mean, Lambda is amazing, but it's just one of a huge set of tools in the serverless kit. In the serverless is also at the storage layer. You can use, for example, Amazon S3 to store any number of files you need. You don't have to think about the infrastructure to durably store those files or to efficiently serve millions of requests per second. You can also use DynamoDB to add a managed, durable NoSQL database to your infrastructure. This database can serve trillions of requests per day. If you love microservices, you can also use EventBridge to streamline and decouple the communication between those microservices. When we talk about user identity and management, you want to avoid writing code to create users and create infrastructure to manage the life cycle of those users. If you are a developer, you've done that dozens of times. It doesn't add value for you or your customers. Instead, you can use Amazon Cognito. It's a fully managed service where you can store your user profiles, you can do authorization and authentication. You can also use the hosted UI, so you don't have to write those HTML pages again. Amazon Cognito supports social and enterprise identity federation. With serverless, you can also do analytics. You can use Amazon Athena for those ad hoc queries on data stored on Amazon S3, for example. You can also use Amazon Athena with federated queries to run analytics on data spread across different sources like MySQL or Postgres or DynamoDB or Redshift without worrying about the underlying infrastructure of the engine running those queries. Finally, as you have seen, developers and architects are first-class citizens in serverless. I know that as a developers, we love to build things. I remember that fantastic CI/CD pipeline I once built. I loved it, but it doesn't generate value for your customers. You can use AWS Code Services, all of them managed services, to implement a serverless CI/CD pipeline in minutes, so you get set up and be productive right away. As a solutions architect, you can also use SAM or CDK to describe the desired state of your infrastructure. Look, these are only a few of all the serverless services you can use to avoid building from scratch. With the right knowledge and the right practices, you can start integrating existing pieces, fully managed services to build an amazing infrastructure. Again, listen to me. For these serverless services, you need a specific guidance. You have to treat them a little bit different. So we take a lot of the Well-Architected framework that still applies to the serverless workloads, because there are some things that do not, like for example, availability zones and EVS volumes. So we took the part that actually still is important for serverless workloads, and we build on that foundation. We gather best practices from Amazon engineering teams, from AWS product teams, and the fantastic serverless community out there, and from our customers, of course. And we create the serverless application lens to give you prescriptive guidance. Things you need to consider to keep your serverless workloads secure, performant, and reasonably priced. The serverless application lens has best practices so you can deploy them in a reliable manner and also operate them efficiently. The serverless application lens enables you to execute or manage the application lifecycle better and faster. Now, what I want to show you is how you can use the serverless application lens with a few common scenarios our customers are building with serverless. And I want to start with this, a serverless web application. BBC, for example, they rebuilt a few months ago its massive website, which is used for over half the population of the UK, and now is being served with Lambda. A cloud guru, for example, uses API gateway and more than 200 Lambda functions to execute its business logic. Fender and Coca-Cola are also amazing examples of how serverless evolve web applications. Both of them are using Lambda and API gateway to offer new experience for the users. So what you see here is a serverless web application. So let's see how you can leverage the serverless application lens in the Well-Architected framework to evaluate this architecture. And let's start with the first pillar, operational excellence. If you want to govern and excel at operating your serverless workload, we recommend the adoption of infrastructure as code. A serverless workload is usually conformed of a lot of moving parts, for which you need an easy, streamlined, repetitive way to define, to deploy, change, and redeploy. I mean, I love humans, but you want to avoid human intervention during this process. Look this sample. This is AWS Serverless Application Model, or SAM, how we call that lovely squirrel over there. These 20 lines of code deploys the services in the diagram at my right. It has never been this easy. SAM is a framework for building serverless applications. You can express functions, API endpoints, databases, and state machines with this shorthand syntax. Now, you can take that code and deploy the exact same infrastructure in another AWS account, which is my next recommendation. You want to separate the environments of your workloads. We recommend having an AWS account per environment so you can isolate them from failures and security issues. Now, SAM is not the only option. With AWS Cloud Development Kit or CDK, you have another option to deploy your serverless workloads. With CDK, you can define resources, which are AWS services with a specific configuration, like a DynamoDB table with this schema, for example. You can also define constructs, which may be full-fledged serverless applications that cover specific use cases, like an API gateway endpoint invoking a Lambda function. After that, you can join both existing resources and constructs and deploy a serverless web applications in minutes. Now, you should be telling me, Hernan, can you please be more prescriptive? When can I use SAM or when can I use CDK? So, if you prefer a declarative template to describe your infrastructure, and if you are already familiar with CloudFormation, adopting SAM for serverless is just natural. If, on the other hand, you have a team of amazing developers, and you want to write that infrastructure in a familiar programming language, use CDK. Either way, please don't start from scratch. There's a lot of people, AWS teams, AWS customers, and the serverless community that may have already walked the path that you are just starting. Use these sound templates or the CDK construct library where you're going to find best practices and patterns supporting hundreds of use cases. Use them. Now, in this world of a lot of pieces doing one thing and doing one thing well, you need a better way to understand the state of your system, the whole system. You should be able to observe your system. For traditional monitoring, you can use Amazon CloudWatch. And it's really important for you to understand, analyze, and alert on metrics that CloudWatch offers out of the box. For example, CPU and memory used by your Lambda functions, the requests that are being throttled by Lambda, or the requests that are arriving at an API gateway endpoint, and the latency that API gateway is adding to your flow. But in the serverless world, it is important to answer more questions than those. You can go beyond that. You can use AWS Xray to instrument your code and get additional context of the internals of your systems. For example, you can instrument Lambda. So incoming requests, those calls are captured, and you can follow that request. Meanwhile, it travels through your system, and you can pinpoint what is causing performance issues, for example. API Gateway, on the other hand, can insert a tracing header in every HTTP request arriving to your border, and it can report back this data to Xray. And you can have that beautiful map over there in the slide, so you can now understand what every event is producing in your system. And of course, there's an easy way to do this. Lambda-powered tools. You can import these libraries. You can decorate your code to make tracing, structured logging, and creating custom metrics a lot easier. As of today, Lambda-powered tools is available for Java and Python. Now, let's talk about security. This pillar revolves around application security, which is really important. It already matters. Controlling access to your border, which may be API endpoints. Remember that a wildcard in an access policy will make you cry sooner than later. So please understand and practice least privilege. It is a must. Also, don't trust any requests going into your endpoints. You can validate and reject or clean and process using the web application firewall, which is fully managed. Remember, don't trust user input. Do you remember Cognito from a few slides before? Do not reinvent the wheel. You can use it as an identity provider, or you can also integrate it with any SAML or JSON Web Token provider. Also, talking about least privilege, don't start an IAM policy from scratch. You can leverage some predefined IAM policies to make it easy to enable fine-grained access to your resources. Also, avoid using long-term credentials. You can leverage IAM roles to provide temporary credentials that STS will rotate for you. This next one is old, but I still see it in practice. Do not store your secrets in your application code or application configuration files. You can use parameter store or secrets manager for those. Either way, remember that you can implement a caching policy to retrieve those secrets from your Lambda functions. Finally, remember that the web application firewall is fully managed, right? So you can define your ACL, your access control list, or you can use existing packages from AWS or one of our security partners. Now, when it comes to reliability, the serverless application lens provides advice to build resiliency. You want to control your inbound request rates. For example, if you do not control your API clients, you don't want them to exhaust your resources. You can easily use throttling via configuration in API Gateway. It is also important for you to understand the retry policy of the services you're using. Maybe you need to deactivate it or easily configure an exponential backup. And you can do that via configuration with step functions. So learn and understand retry policies. For Lambda, for example, maximum event age and maximum retry attempts are going to be your best friends. Now, if you have non-serverless resources in your infrastructure, you still have to love them. You still have to take care of them. For example, if you're using RDS, you can use RDS proxy to pull and manage the database connection to the database. Also, you have to remember that Lambda maximum duration execution time is 15 minutes. If you have longer transactions, my recommendation is that you can separate that logic and use step functions to orchestrate that flow. Also, sometimes it is not easy to see it, sometimes it is not easy to implement it. But if you can, remove your synchronous or move your synchronous processes to asynchronous processes. With this, you will make better use of execution times, you will decouple your infrastructure, and you will add resiliency. Remember this, you want to optimize your serverless architectures for time use, not for the number of Lambda functions. This will also lead to a decoupled infrastructure where you can use, for example, SQS for services interactions and SNS to communicate resources. Finally, you can remove the burden of events routing from your application code. You can use EventBridge to do that granularly and reliably. Remember, do not use Lambda to transport data. Now, when you're tuning your system, it is important to understand the scaling behavior of the services you're using. For example, how Lambda manages concurrency, or what's the initial throughput for EventBridge, or the request limit for API gateway. You need to learn about those. Another recommendation is, well, I know that we all love the code we produce, right? It's our most precious thing sometimes as developers. But in my experience, there's always chance to improve, to optimize that code. So review, test, and change, and repeat every time you can. If you're using DynamoDB, sizing throughput can be a challenge, specifically if there's no traffic history. So remember, you can use on-demand capacity, DynamoDB on-demand capacity. You can evaluate your usage, and then in production, on a later phase in production, you can move to provision if it's needed. Now, during your professional career, when creating infrastructure, if you have had a real friend, that's caching. So use it whenever it's possible. Cache at the application client, cache in the client application, cache in CloudFront, in API gateway, or AppSync if you're using it. Cache in your Lambda code, or you can use DynamoDB Accelerator. Someone once said, the best Lambda function is the one that doesn't exist. So learn and use services integration. For example, do not use Lambda to transport data. You can integrate API gateway with SQS, SNS, even DynamoDB to read and create items. And lastly, if you are not sure about the power you need from Lambda, you can use power tuning to figure it out. Since we're talking about performance, you can go to that URL in the slide. You can download this tool and deploy it in your AWS account. You can choose what you want to optimize for. In this case, it's performance, but you can also choose cost and run it. Lambda Power Tuning will invoke your function with multiple memory configurations. It will analyze all the execution logs from those invocations and will help you find that sweet spot between performance and cost. You choose, but driven by data. Now, talking about cost optimization, your serverless application should always be optimized for cost. Again, and please believe me, there's a chance for improvement in your application code. You can reduce the number of packages you need. You can optimize the code to shorten execution times. Also, if you have Lambda functions, invoking Lambda functions, you will incur in costs while in idle. Again, try to move those synchronous processes to asynchronous. And if you're using CloudWatch for monitoring, You can use embedded metric format. It will ease the process of creating metrics, and it will also optimize for cost. And when evaluating this pillar, cost is the key factor in your infrastructure application or in your infrastructure, in your serverless infrastructure. Remember that you can use Lambda power tuning to optimize for cost. Remember that you can easily run for every function in your AWS account, no matter the programming language. After a few sessions, when you go through with your solutions architect or your partner, your web application, your serverless web application may look like this one. It is secure, reliable, it will automatically scale to meet your demand, and it is optimized for cost. And with the right practices, it can improve and time passes by. Remember, this is just one of many common scenarios. For example, I love events, right? So you can do event-driven or event sourcing or both. It doesn't matter. You can do it with serverless. You can use DynamoDB as your source of truth or Kinesis to receive a stream of events at any throughput. You can use any number of Lambda functions to execute your business logic and state functions to orchestrate that business logic. You can use SQS or SNS for messaging between your resources. Imagine this. You have a factory that produces a high volume of inventory. You must ensure that defective products are not shipped. Remember, I love humans, but we are too slow to do this. What you see here is an event-driven solution that uses machine learning, for example, and a flow orchestrated by state functions. This is simple, scalable, reliable, and powerful. Lego also loves events. They have a beautiful mix of different patterns: request response, asynchronous with API Gateway and Lambda. And what you're watching here is the Lego's order routing system for the e-commerce platform, all based on EventBridge. These are only a few customer stories. There are thousands leveraging this new mindset. And you can too if you remember a few things. First, your Lambda functions should do one thing and do it well. Make them single purpose. Code is dead, is a liability. If there's a service integration, you may not need a function. Learn about concurrency and throughput. This behavior is key when you're doing serverless. If you're using Lambda, remember that the function environment and underlying infrastructure is going to die at any time, so make your application code stateless. Do not orchestrate your workflows with application code. Use state machines. State functions is a powerful orchestration tool. And remember what Werner Vogel says: everything fails all the time. So use managed services that take care of those failures. So what you're going to do after this session is to start a well-architected review. You now have all what you need and 3 options. You can call a solutions architect from AWS, one of our partners with the well-architected competency, and you can always do it by yourself. I invite you to check the Well-Architected tool in the web console and follow along. I want to close this session with this quote: there are thousands of customers in any industry you can imagine, innovating at a pace that was not possible before. As of today, there is no fastest way to deliver value than serverless. Thanks a lot for watching and have an amazing day. Bye-bye.